Hide. Okay, hello everyone. Hopefully this is all working. Okay, I'm really pleased to be here today to talk to you all about the Barberry Carpet moth and the work that we've been doing recently. Yeah, it's. I'm sure we're all just getting used to using this Zoom still. I've just had to decamp into my lounge from where I normally go because of the rain drumming on the roof, and I would be really pleased if I get through this talk without the dogs suddenly barking. So assume, well, if I go onto mute, that's why it's happened. Don't worry. Rather than shouting "shut up" down my microphone here, I will just mute myself, quiet them down, and then come back. But yeah, fingers crossed that won't happen. They're snoozing quietly at the moment, so it's all fine. So bringing Barberry Carpet moth back from the brink. Well, this is a Back from the Brink project. I work for Butterfly Conservation, and it's a heritage. It's a project with heritage lottery funding. And there is the, I think, beautiful Barberry Carpet moth sat on its food plant, common barberry. And hopefully I can't move on the screen actually. Why can't I move the screen on?
I can see your mouse moving.
Yeah.
I use my arrows usually to try and get.
Yeah, it won't. I'm using the arrows.
Oh, okay. Bear with us, everyone.
Sorry, folks.
It might be worth just try clicking on this within the screen to make sure you're clicked within that window.
There we go. It's gone now.
There we go. Okay, fine. Good. Slide 2. Okay, so the Barberry Carpet moth is Parulipe berberata. I hope I pronounced that right. It's the family Geometridae, so there's over 300 moths in the UK that are geometric. It's actually recorded quite widely in the world, this species. It's across Europe, but it's often only locally, and it does occur as far east as Mongolia. It was once recorded widely in England, as far north as Yorkshire and as far south as Sussex, but it's declined hugely. So by the late 1990s, there were just 5 known colonies in England. But through conservation efforts, there are now 12 known colonies, and we hope, obviously, through our work, that we'll see more colonies appearing in the next few years. So it's a priority species in the UK Biodiversity Action Plan, Section 41 species under the NERC Act, which is Natural Environment and Rural Communities Act, a Red Data Book species, and it's also fully protected under Schedule 5 of the Wildlife and Countryside Act of 1981. So I just wanted to tell you a bit about the life cycle of Barberry carpet. So the moth has got 2 generations a year, so that means that adults are on the wing in late May and June, and then later on in late July throughout August. Eggs, tiny little pale eggs, are laid singly or in pairs, as you can see here on the food plant. The larvae leave this distinctive lacework feeding pattern on the leaves, and they rest in a very distinct looped posture as well, as you can see there, but they're not the only larvae that will feed on Barbary, and so you can't really identify them easily from the feeding signs. So the larvae go through 4 instars. They have 2 distinct diagnostic dark lines towards the tail end, as you can see in the picture on the right there, and also they've got these distinct skin ridges on some of their segments, so they look like little curled up bits of twig, really. But they've also got 2 distinct colour forms. So one is this dark grey and brown colour, and the other is a more pink and brown caterpillar that's sort of smoother looking as well. The larvae spin a cocoon, either in the soil at the base of the food plant, or if the soil is too hard, they will pupate amongst dead leaves. And they've apparently on occasion been known to pupate amongst leaves on the bush as well, spinning 2 leaves together, but I don't think that's seen very often. Adult moths are known to visit flowers for nectar, but it's not essential for them. They are night flyers, but they can be disturbed from vegetation by day. They're known to visit light, and they've turned up in traps at least 1 kilometre from known colonies in the past. But they're also occasional migrants. So in 1966, 2 Barberry carpet males turned up in a trap in Kent, on the Kent coast, during a period when there were a lot of other migrants turning up. So obviously is capable of flying long distance on occasion. So there's lots of things that you could get a Barbary carpet confused with if you didn't get a good view, but the main species, I suppose, that are most similar are the ruddy carpet, which you see in the top left there, which has got a much more pinkish and orangey background colour. And then the one that I think is really similar is the streamer moth down in the bottom left, but it does have a different shape wing, and the markings towards the base of the wing are quite different, but I think the ones closer towards the head are very similar. A lot of people that I meet through this project, when I show them a picture of Barberry carpet, say, "Oh yeah, I think I recognise that. Yeah, I've definitely seen that." But I think probably very few of them actually have seen a Barberry carpet, and I think that's just a measure of how the carpet moth family can, well, and lots of moths can look very similar if you don't take a really proper view of them. So why is the Barberry carpet so rare then? Well, it's a monophagous species, so it's reliant purely on common Barbary Berberis vulgaris as a food plant, although I have to say that females in captivity have also laid on similar cultivated Berberis species, and it has on occasion in the wild been found feeding on a different Berberis, but that was when it was in a mixed planting situation with other Berberis species. So common barberry, it was once a really common plant in Britain, but it has been removed on a grand scale since the late 1800s. So it was discovered to be an alternate host of a wheat rust fungus called Puccinia graminis, which was capable of destroying wheat and barley crops. So the understandable grubbing out of barberry hedges, it was so widespread that even at the turn of, even around 1900, lepidopterists were becoming concerned for the future of the moth, and removal of barberry from hedges continued well into the 70s, and with even instances into the 1990s too. So obviously with all that removal of barberry, the remaining colonies became isolated from each other and genetically isolated. And then there are some additional drivers of decline. So early hedgerow cutting being the main one really. So because of the life cycle of the moth, larvae are on the plant throughout September. So early hedge cutting can potentially destroy and damage larvae or completely, reduce the size of their food source. So we would tend to recommend that, hedge cutting starts from October through to early March, but it's quite common for people once they've done the harvest to when the ground is dry, to go out and do the hedge cutting. And as I say, this can be catastrophic. Also, apparently stubble burning in the past has probably caused some issues with and affected some colonies. So this map shows you the distribution of Barberry carpet going back to pre-1970. So the yellow dots show the distribution that we know of pre-1970. And then you can see from the blue dots, that was between 1970 and 1999. So it's definitely reducing at that point. And then from 2000 onwards are the black dots, but it's actually reduced a bit further since then. There's, that we've lost colonies since then. So, but there were previously colonies in Suffolk and Hampshire and Sussex and Yorkshire. And so the range has contracted further, and there are now just colonies in Wiltshire, Gloucestershire, Oxfordshire, and in North Dorset. So I'm going to try and explain the wheat rust. Bear with me, this is not my specialist subject. But basically, the problem is this Puccinia graminis. It's a threat to wheat production. It's largely been eradicated from Western Europe in the mid-20th century. And the issue with Barbary is that it helps the stem rust to overwinter, and then it can take over more in the crop the next spring. So basically, at the end of the crop season, the wheat rusts produce hardy overwintering spores. So it's these ones down here, the teliospores, on the rust-infected plant debris. So in the spring, these germinate and they produce basidiospores, which you can see over here. And these are the ones that can infect the barberry. And then the barberry acts as a bridge in the wheat growing seasons. Esiospores, which are over here, get produced on the barberry in the spring, and they can then spread into a new wheat crop. And it just means that it completes this pathogen sexual cycle, which would then mean that new rust strains can be developed from that, which then might be more adapted to the UK climate. So it's obviously a serious problem for arable farming. This shows you a picture of Barbary that has been infected by a rust. But if you see a rust on Barbary, it's not necessarily this particular stem rust. There's a lot of different species, and that many of them, there are many that will affect Barbary. So butterfly conservation and other organisations and independent ecologists have been conserving Barberry carpet for decades. BC coordinate annual larval surveys by a brilliant team of licensed surveyors, many of whom have been doing it for many years, liaising with site owners and managers, and there's been a lot of smaller scale Barbary planting in the past. And planting more Barbary in and around the extant populations of the moth has proven to be an effective method of conserving the species. There hasn't been an outbreak of the stem rust in the UK since the 1950s, and at that time rust-resistant varieties of wheat were developed. So we thought that this issue was solved, and considerable work has happened through a team of expert growers, predominantly Ian Hughes and Chester Zoo, and also lepidopterists, mainly Paul Waring and also Mark Parsons at Butterfly Conservation. Many introductions of captive bred larvae have taken place to seemingly suitable sites in the past decades with mixed success. So I thought it would be important to tell you a bit about the previous conservation efforts before the Back from the Brink project. I'm not going to be able to go into this with any depth because this could be this information, if you were to concentrate on this, it would take up at least 3 other complete presentations. So just know that there's been an awful lot of work in the past, and so I'm going to try and run through this quickly. So in the 1970s, there was only one remaining colony known in Suffolk, and this was threatened by road building. So captive breeding started at that time, and this was then led to introductions in Lincolnshire, Wiltshire and Peterborough. In the 1980s, this Suffolk colony still remained, but several bushes had been lost to a road widening scheme, and then there was a fire next to the bushes in 1983, so that didn't help the colony. And the moth was awarded protection through the Wildlife and Countryside Act in 1981. In 1987, Paul Waring, who was working at the Joint Nature Conservancy Council, he started research on the Barberry carpet. And in 1988, he started doing practical work for the species. He managed to establish a captive bred colony using females caught in Bury St Edmunds in May 1998, one of which lay eggs, and then started establishment trials for new colonies as soon as he had enough larvae. And the sites, the introduction sites, had to be checked with negative results for at least 5 generations of the moth before they could go ahead with any introductions. So that's Paul down there in the bottom right, beating bushes for larvae. So in 1991, unfortunately, the Suffolk colony was lost through 2 fires that happened, and there's only been one individual moths, probably a larva, seen there since in 1995. The Barberry carpet species recovery program started, which led to extensive surveys for wild populations on wild Barbary all over England. In 1992, BIATSA, which was the Zoo Federation Invertebrate Working Group, established a plan with English Nature to use zoo facilities for the benefit of native invertebrates. They drew up a list of candidate invertebrates, and Barberry carpet was selected, and 4 zoos received this grant from English Nature to provide them with the materials that they needed. So these were Dudley Zoo, Whipsnade, Pensinore and Paynton Zoo. Paul Waring mentored the breeders on how to rear moths and produced a protocol for them. And David Shepherd from Natural England, which was English Nature, was instrumental in getting this going too. So then in the following years, there was a big effort from zoos to produce a robust captive bred population for introductions, but they had limited success. And I think with hindsight, they think that this might be to do with potential inbreeding after a number of generations of these larvae, and also an inability to successfully overwinter the pupae outdoors. But then in 1997 to 99, there were some breakthroughs, and further wild populations were found in Wiltshire, Gloucestershire and Dorset through all the extensive surveying from the Species Recovery Programme. In 1988, more larvae were then provided to breeders by Paul Waring. So he had crossed the Wiltshire genes with Suffolk stock and produced a more robust moth, basically. this became more successful. Thousands of larvae were reared for introductions. And then as part of the Biodiversity Action Plan for the species, 10 more colonies were planned to be established in the former range by releasing up to 1,300 larvae at a time at some sites. Sometimes you'd have a combination of adult moths, which would be mated females and males, and also larvae released at a site. And hundreds of Barbary bushes were planted. Back in 2002, zoos stopped their breeding, but Ian Hughes continued to breed them in Wales right up until 2016, and he provided thousands of moths for reintroductions. Also in 2002, 150 bushes were planted by a landowner next to a tiny Gloucestershire roadside colony that was very restricted, so they wanted to spread it onto the adjacent land. So you can see that's the site there on the bottom left in Gloucestershire. And then 2005 to 7, Barberry Carpet colony was found in Oxfordshire following more surveys. And in 2007, the 2 larvae were found on the planted Barbary at the Gloucestershire colony, proving that this proved that Barbary planting right adjacent to colonies would encourage the spread of the species. And also, the larvae were found on bushes around 1 metre to 1.5 metres tall, so that gave them some idea of how big the plants needed to be. So the most recent introductions then were in 2013 to 15. These were at Cholderton Estate, Beale Park and Cotswolds Park, and they used thousands of larvae. So that down in the bottom right there, that is apparently the oldest Barbary bush in Britain. It's at Cholderton, and they think it's possibly 150 years old. And sadly, despite all the efforts that went in, most of the introductions appear to have been unsuccessful, but they did learn a lot of interesting information about the species, and some of the colonies do need further surveys. And then the picture at the bottom right is just, it's a Barbary propagation workshop that was put on for the zoos that became involved in a scheme to try and encourage moths. So this was Chester Zoo. So that basically brings us up to the Barberry Carpet back from the Brink Project, which started in 2017. So the aim of this project is to encourage the spread of the species through planting 3,000 Barbary bushes around the Dorset colony and the colonies in North Wiltshire and Gloucestershire. So there's no captive bred stock available anymore, but the spread of existing colonies have been achieved at Dorset, Wiltshire and Gloucestershire colonies through planting. BC thought we had a sufficient understanding of the distribution and ecology to confidently design a project, knew that we could still make a difference for the species, and also some of these remaining colonies are so small and they're really vulnerable and isolated from each other, so there was real potential to link them up. We really wanted to increase the profile of the species in the areas and link up these colonies. Plus, wheat rust was no longer thought to be an issue. So the Barberry Carpet project is one of 19 back from the Brink projects in England, and you've already heard today that there's a checkered skipper project. Well, it's called Roots of Rockingham, which is another BC-led back from the Brink project, and another one in the Cotswolds. But there's 19 projects in all, which aim to save 20 species from extinction and benefit at least 200 more. Projects span England from Cornwall through to Northumberland, and there's a whole diverse range of species and habitats to benefit, including things like pine marten, ladybird spider, Cornish path moth, willow tit, all sorts of lovely species and habitats that are benefiting from these projects. The programme is run by Landfill England, funded by the National Lottery, and the projects are delivered by different organisations: Butterfly Conservation, Plant Life, Bug Life, the Ark Trust, Bat Conservation Trust, and RSPB Bumblebee Conservation Trust, and the Vincent Wildlife Trust. So this map shows the 2 main target areas that we're working in the project. So one is North Dorset, and then one is the North Wiltshire and Gloucestershire area. Sorry that the maps aren't very clear. We do have to keep the colony locations secret due to the vulnerability of the species. But there are also colonies of the moth in Oxfordshire and one in South Wiltshire, but these haven't been included in the project. This is partly due to the geography, partly due to the fact that they've already had a lot of planting around them, and partly due to sort of limited funding. So the Wiltshire and Gloucestershire target area, this is the main focus of the project. It's got 8 known colonies in the area. they're very isolated from each other, spread throughout this area, and we've got this target of planting 2,500 bushes over the 4-year project. The aim is to link them up with loads more planting at those colonies, but also by creating these stepping stones of suitable habitat for the moth between them. And this is the Dorset project area then. So it's North Dorset, near to Blandford Forum, and the aim again is to plant at least 500 Barbary bushes over the 4 years. So my role started in July 2017, initially at 1 day a week, but luckily this was increased because it didn't feel doable at 1 day a week. I had lots of initial site meetings, made contact with local BC branches, the licensed surveyors and the different project partners. So these include Forestry Commission, Dorset County Council, Wiltshire Wildlife Trust, Highgrove Estate, National Trust. Made contact with the growers that we were using in the project. So this was Chester Zoo and then Ian Hughes in Wales, who I've already mentioned. He's been involved with Barberry Carpet work for a long time. And we set up agreements for purchasing the first lot of plants in winter 2017. I started to arrange these planting locations and advertise for volunteer help through lots of articles going into parish newsletters and so on. I was trained in larval survey in the late August. All the surveying for Barberry Carpet needs to happen under licence from Natural England. So I accompanied one of the licensed surveyors for his checks in North Wiltshire. And the method is to beat the bushes to find larvae, which I'm sure many of you are familiar with, and it sounds more violent than it is, but you've got your beating tray there and a stick, and you just hold the beating tray underneath the bush and tap it with the stick and see what falls off. Once larvae are found, they need to be carefully placed back on the leaves, and we leave that particular bush or section of bush alone. So it's a presence-absence survey technique due to the potentially damaging monitoring technique. So we wouldn't bash the whole bush and do a complete check of the numbers of larvae and get a good idea of the population, because we'd probably mangle quite a few larvae in the process. So yeah, we obviously can't do that. So it's a bit of a drawback though of the survey technique. We don't get a huge amount of quantitative data from it, but we do manage to know whether the colony is still present, so that's the most important thing. So what you really want to see is a Barbary carpet larvae, as is on the left here, and what you often see on the beating tray is lots of these Barbary sawfly larvae. They're quite a recent arrival in the UK, but they really are doing well on Barbary, and they like the more the cultivated Berberis species as well. But loads of other species fall onto these beating trays, get lots of spiders, snails, shield bugs, all sorts of things. So it really shows what a good plant it is for wildlife. Another side project I've had going on is been collecting berries, and I was lucky enough to have a volunteer send me lots of berries from the Oxfordshire colony. So been sort of planting, well, doing a lot of berry collection in the autumn, especially actually while I'm doing the larval surveys. It's a good time for collecting some berries, and we've had a lot of people growing on extra plants for the project. So there's been mixed success with the growing. It's quite difficult to, it's a bit of a tricky species to germinate. It needs a period of cold, and it's slow growing as well and prone to getting mildew. What I'm finding at home, this is my current Barbary nursery at home. It does need weeding because that's not all Barbary in there, but it's I find that birds and small mammals frequently disturb the pots of seedlings, and so I go back to water them and they've been disturbed yet again. But I've also sent out lots of berries to people who live far outside of our project area, but they'd really like to grow Barbary, and Barbary is quite a hard plant to come across because of this particular, this historic weed brush issue. Not a lot of places sell it, so I've been able to at least send people berries that they can grow on at home, hopefully. I've also advised them to plant the barberries away from arable land. So we had this target of getting 3,000 plants in the ground over 4 years. So it's quite a daunting target to start with. I managed to arrange for the Chester Zoo plants to be delivered to a central location in Wiltshire, and I got them distributed then out to to some very kindly volunteers with space on their land, that because I don't live in these colony areas, I live quite far away, and then I managed to deliver out from there. The Dorset plants were delivered by our grower in Wales to Wareham Forest, because he was already visiting there, and then I was able to pick them up from there. They were looked after by the Forestry Commission warden there, so it was really appreciated. And like I say, like I earlier said, I was putting lots of articles into local magazines and parish newsletters, and this proved to be quite successful for finding planting locations, as well as word of mouth. Some of the locations were already arranged during the planning stages of the project, so that was really helpful. So, you know, when I visited landowners to deliver plants, I would have site meetings with them and go and have a look at them and select the suitable planting sites. And we're really looking for planting locations to be within 2 kilometres of an existing colony, either that or 2 kilometres of one of our plantings, and the aim that that would help the dispersal of the moth. So in year one, the winter volunteer tasks had some great enthusiasm around some of the colony areas, in part due to some of the key individuals that are involved and their ability to drum up local support and, you know, all their good contacts as well. So we've been doing all the planting really between October and March. One Wiltshire branch member here on the right, Morris, took some plants to distribute himself and has done over all of the years of the project, so that's been really appreciated. And we've been really looking for well-drained ground. If the ground is waterlogged over winter, we think the pupae will rot in waterlogged ground, and the plant deals well with full sun or partial shade. And it's really some of the characters that have been involved that have made this successful, I think. So Mary here, she has stored plants for me at her home over the 3 planting seasons so far. She's planted many of the plants on her own land and has got lots of cuttings going as well. And Martin Barber, that is pictured here, was a brilliant advocate for the moth, found lots of local planting locations in his village. I believe that he was the one that actually first discovered the colony in the village, or got in touch with butterfly conservation about it. And he, as a local gardener, he was persuading a lot of his local clients to have Barbary in their garden, so that was really appreciated. And I would just like to say, sadly, rest in peace to Martin Barber. We lost him last year. Very sad loss, and he's very much missed. And in the Dorset target area, we did lots of planting with butterfly conservation volunteers, Forestry Commission and their wood warden volunteers, and with Dorset County Council and their apprentices and volunteers. So this is us planting on this very hard ground here, this chalky bank on an old disused railway line. And we were planting a lot on nature reserves, but also private gardens and a local churchyard. And so by the end of the first winter, all in all, we'd planted and delivered 781 plants. And this was against an original target for that year of 250 plants. So I was really pleased with that. Really good support from the partners and volunteers, and the plants were available at that time. So I chose to try and go for an ambitious target. This is a volunteer team hard at work in Dorset, digging out the bramble roots before planting Barbary. And I'm hoping that with the lockdown, with all the gardening that people have been doing, it's kept everyone in tip-top shape, ready for a last season of planting Barbary this winter. So we were contacted in November 2017 by the John Innes Centre, crop scientists in Norwich, and they'd heard that we were planting lots of Barbary and were concerned about the potential for re-emergence of stem rust in the UK. So this was obviously a bit of a blow. We went into the project thinking that, that everything's fine, rust-resistant varieties of wheat were being used and so on. But so we had a lot of talks with the John Innes Centre and agreed to work really closely with them to protect the future of arable farming and the needs of the Barberry carpet moth too. So we changed our plans from planting, we had intended to plant a lot on arable land in the hedgerows because, it was historically Barbary was in these arable hedgerows, and our target areas for planting are also predominantly arable. So there, it's been an easy thing, and we'd already had contact with landowners in the area for that. But we had this revised target of planting at least 20 metres from arable land, so that we didn't, so that our plantings didn't cause any future issues with arable farming, obviously. So this is just a picture of us. We had a meeting at the Oxfordshire colony in summer 2018 to show the John Innes Centre scientists Barberry carpet larvae. So that was really good. That's unfortunately been my only visit to the Oxfordshire colony, but they've got some really big hedgerows there, lots of barberry. So John Innes Centre published a really good paper on the potential for re-emergence of stem rust, and our work together as well to look after the needs of farming and the moth. But then unfortunately, this was picked up by a few papers, and then we started to see these sensationalist headlines appearing in papers. And luckily I was on holiday during this period, but my poor line manager, Mark Parsons, had a lot of phone calls about Barbary and what did we think we were doing and so on. And these headlines didn't really help the reputation of the moth or the plant. You know, things like, would you let thieves steal your grain? You know, destroy the common Barbary, you know, and things like that. So there was a lot of backpedaling and talking to a lot of people about this. And in fact, during the project, it's become really important to raise awareness of the positive benefits and interest of Barbary. We've moved more towards encouraging planting in gardens, schools, community spaces and nature reserves, and less towards planting on arable land. And we always, anyway, note down the distance to arable land for our plantings and take grid references, so that if ever there was a problem, we would be able to do something about it. But actually, there are some benefits for planting more in people's gardens, in that the opportunities for aftercare are greater, and so hopefully our plants will be healthier. There's a lot of push on social media and articles and so on, and blogs about the project, and lots of good information about the plant out there. And in fact, we've just produced this fact sheet you can see on the left here about the Barbary and its importance for moths and other wildlife. So there's at least 20 known moth species. We suspect many more that will feed on Barbary leaves. It's got fantastic yellow flowers that are an amazing nectar source, and if you are around them in May, they're just buzzing with insect life. Also got these lovely red berries, really good for the birds. Apparently field fairs love them. Also, there's some disagreement over whether it's an archaeophyte or a native plant in Britain, but either way, it's been in the UK since Neolithic times. We know this because deposits were found, evidence was found in deposits at a Neolithic site called Grimes Graves in Norfolk. I mean, the berries are edible for us as well as for birds, really rich in vitamin C, loads of health benefits, and it used to be used frequently in pies, jams and pickles, and was commonly planted and used in kitchen gardens in medieval times. So I've had various public moth trapping events during the summer. I've had 2 each summer, and these have been really good fun, really great for raising awareness of moths and trying to improve their image. Well, I've been able to invite expert lepidopterists along, which has been great because there's a lot of people out there that just get so excited about Barberry carpet. So that's fantastic to get them along to see the moth, and also we've had some good photographers along too. Unfortunately this year, in the current situation, we missed out on doing the May. I would have been doing some surveying in May. I'm really hoping that by August I might be able to do a public event. We'll have to see. So the first time we managed to get Barberry carpet was at the Dorset colony in May 2018. We managed to get 5 adult Barberry carpet. And Barberry carpet doesn't often turn up in moth traps, and like I say, the main method of surveying for the species is to do the larval survey. So it's a real treat to see the adult moth, and it was really good here to have the Forestry Commission warden or wildlife ranger and one of his volunteers along to see the species, because they've been working hard on it for a long time and doing a lot of planting. So that was really good. So the summer months have included a lot of visiting the planted plants to do aftercare, taking accurate good references of the plants, and visiting and advising landowners as well. And I'd just like to thank our partners at the National Trust, Forestry Commission, Wiltshire Wildlife Trust and Dorset County Council in particular. They've been brilliant. They've visited plantings to water them, and volunteers have kept an eye on them too, so it's been brilliant. So the aftercare has been shown to be really, really important. You know, we've done a lot of planting now, and unfortunately not all of these plants have survived. We wouldn't have expected that anyway. There are issues such as small Barbary plants in the winter look very much like dead twigs. They can be easily overlooked, overwhelmed by competing vegetation. Tree guards and stakes help you find the plants again, which is great, but they're also expensive. They take up a lot of space. Literally for me in transporting them, you know, it's quite, yeah, I need a lot of room, and at the moment I've got a car and a small trailer, and I've got a lot of plants, tree guards and stakes and tools and the all important tea kit to cart around the place, so it does take up a lot of room. But also, you know, tree guards can look messy. They're a bit of a target for being vandalised. Not all site managers really want tree guards on their sites, so they're invaluable if there's a risk of the plants being grazed. It seems that sheep, deer and rabbits are particularly fond of Barbary, but also you must use mesh tree guards. Barbary is very susceptible to mildew if there isn't good air circulation around it. So, so yeah, it's been shown to be really important to consider this. So a good example is at this site in Dorset, we didn't use tree guards initially. I thought, well, it's this. We were gapping up parts of this hedge. It's protected on both sides with stock fencing. I thought, wow, that's great. That's ideal. We don't need to use tree guards. And this particular site, it was a long way for the volunteers to carry all the tools and everything. And so I didn't use them initially. So and then this winter we planted 50 plants and went back 2 months later, and they'd all been dug out by rabbits. They hadn't been eaten. I honestly think the rabbits might have been after some minerals in the soil, because it was obviously these were in different compost. You know, maybe that was the problem. But you know, so then I had to go back. We went back with the volunteers and had to plant more and use tree guards. So you know, sometimes it is really important, depending on the individual site. So in years 2 and 3, we're planting continued at a steady pace, well, quite a hectic pace at times. Had very ambitious planting targets and did lots of deliveries all over the target areas, driving lots. I did have a camper van here at the time, and unfortunately it finally died in March last year after a hard winter of deliveries. But yeah, it was really busy and hectic, and we got lots of good landowners on board. This is one of the sites where we've been planting, and this is the first year. This is a Dorset churchyard. Planted 5 plants there, and I marked them. We all marked them out with stakes, but then unfortunately they were mown. So that wasn't ideal. So the second year went back and put this mesh guard around it and planted more. And then in the third year, when we were last at this area, while weeding, we managed to snap one of the plants, because again, you know, once it's surrounded by long grasses and so on, they just blend in the winter, and they do look like dead twigs. So this is another challenge. We have replanted there for the 3rd time, so hopefully they'll all be fine now. And I'm just going to show you some of the sites where we've been planting. So this is an old landfill site in Dorset. Much more beautiful, as you can see, than it sounds. Already a lot of planting had happened there. That's just a lot of mixed planting, native planting in the background, but there's a really good local ecologist involved who's been involved with Barberry Carpet work for years, and he's planted previously at this site. So this is a site that has had larval surveys done, but they haven't found a moth yet. But yeah, we've done a lot of planting there. We've done a lot of glade creation and barberry planting in North Dorset with the Forestry Commission, and their volunteers and BC volunteers working together has been really, really good. This is a privately owned young woodland in Dorset where the owner is really into nature conservation, and so we put in 50 plants and protected them, and this was with the Dorset volunteers last winter. And this is a task with the great Dorset County Council crew and with volunteers on a site near Blandford, and this is the all-important tea break. And you'll notice the dogs milling around looking for crumbs there. And this is another task with the Dorset County Council lot. So we've been weeding the Barbary there and actually putting wood chip down around the seedlings to make them easier to re-find. And then there's just our excellent tea kit, which is very welcome. But yeah, it's always good fun with all of these volunteers. And then we've been collaborating with the National Trust at Sutton Lane Meadows Nature Reserve in Wiltshire, which is a fantastic site. It is surrounded by arable fields, but we're far enough away from them with where we're planting. So we've been, and this is a local volunteer, Gina, who's been really involved with the project. So, and the National Trust range Paul there. And also working with the Woodland Trust in Wiltshire a lot. So had great events there where residents were able to take home Barbary plants for their gardens. And it's great because the Woodland Trust have just put together their 5-year management plan, and they've included care and protection of Barbary in the plan and really provided for the needs of the moth. So that's excellent progress. And this is a site we worked at in November, just gone, Coniga Mead Nature Reserve in Malmesbury. Malmesbury doesn't have the moth, but it could really be an excellent stepping stone for the moth. I think we planted over 50, not 50 volunteers, 50 plants, and had 17 volunteers and 4 dogs along. Not that they really helped, but lots of people could take home plants for their own gardens again. And this shows more planting with the Woodland Trust. And it's an interesting site, this, because it has got old Barbary in its hedgerows, and it's also adjacent to an old priory. So the Barberries would have been used in jams and pies in the past there, I should think. And this is a lovely site that worked out with the Cotswold Canal Trust and volunteers in Gloucestershire. So it's an old roundhouse, and we were planting in the old kitchen garden. So all in all, there's been loads of deliveries to landowners and households in the project areas, and there's been 123 planting sites so far. My general approach has been to provide a minimum of 3 plants to each location, with the idea that you might unfortunately lose 1 plant, but that hopefully in the future then there's enough plant resource, enough leaves really in effect for these Barberries to support a little colony of the moth. So we provide people with lots of aftercare advice, and some sites have had a lot more planting. So for instance, Highgrove Estate has had 160 plants. Apparently Prince Charles is very keen on the idea of Barberry Carpet moth moving in, and I've had to say that it would be against the law for him to go looking for the Barberry Carpet, but yeah, we do provide aftercare advice and do advise people not to disturb the plants during the summer months in case of larvae being on the leaves, not to dig around the base of the plants because that would be where they would pupate, and also to not cut back their plants between October and March. So these maps show you where we've got to then in our planting. So this is the Wiltshire and Gloucestershire target area. The red dots show the colonies, and you'll see from the text there, we've delivered and planted 2,085 plants so far. So it falls short of our target of 2,500 plants, but we've got another winter to go. It is a large area, mainly arable, but there's a lot of opportunities out there still. And I've got a great team of volunteers and project partners here, and have got some locations lined up already. But the blue dots on the map show you where we planted in the first year, the green in the second year, and the yellow last year. So yeah, I think we're getting a good coverage now. And then Dorset, that's how we're doing in Dorset. So after 3 seasons, we've actually planted and delivered over 1,200 plants in this area. This far exceeds the target of 500 plants. I might have gone a bit wild in Dorset, but we've got a really supportive team of project partners, good levels of local interest, fantastic team of volunteers there, and I'd still like to get more sites in this area and try and even out the coverage to make it more of a circle around Blandford. So yes, you know, again, the red is the colony, and the blue is year 1, green is year 2, and yellow is last winter. So that's a total of 3,321 plants that we've got in the ground now. So I'm really pleased with that. So fingers crossed, year 4 should hopefully see another 900 plants going in. This is if all goes to plan. So this means that we will really far exceed our original planting targets, which is great. We've been able to get more plants really because of the extra growing on for the project, but also Ian Hughes in Wales, our grower, has got this habit of gifting us suddenly with a few extra trays of seedlings that he's been getting going in these old fishing crates that he finds washed up on the Welsh coastline. So I've had all these extra trays of seedlings throughout the project, and so that's been brilliant. And it's also helped to make up for the inevitable losses. You know, unfortunately, the first summer after our planting in year 1, it was a really bad drought year. You know, these Barbary plants are quite slow growing and easily outcompeted by brambles and clematis and so on. And you know, some plants have been nibbled off where we haven't protected them, and you know, and some have even been mown unintentionally. So, you know, unfortunately, there have been quite a few losses, I think. So hopefully, this means at the end of the 4 years, we will actually have 3,000 live plants at least. So we've had public events. You know, in the summer again, we've had in 2019 3 moth trapping events. One at the Dorset colony, in which we managed to trap 17 Barberry carpet, which was fantastic. One in Wiltshire, where we trapped 2 Barberry carpet despite the rain, and these have been brilliant events. Invited people along to them, and you know, expert lepidopterists as well as members of the public and key volunteers and so on, and it's been really, really good and great to see some Barberry carpet. We've had 9 traps going at once, I think, so in Wiltshire, so that was really fun. And also back from the Brink team and myself attended the Western Burt Big Forest Find last year, and also worked with people from the Gloucestershire branch of BC, Peter Hugo in particular. Unfortunately, we had no Barbary carpet there, but we did have lots of traps out, and this map-winged swift was a nice treat to see, because that was a new one on me. And it was a great opportunity to find new planting locations, tell lots of people about the project and so on. And so I had lots of new places to plant after that. So last survey season, when we were doing the larval survey, trained up a new surveyor. So this is Ellie from Wiltshire Wildlife Trust. She's not praying there. She's actually looking at a tiny Barbary carpet larvae, because when we were out, the larvae that we find were probably first instar. So you had to look really hard. And how is Barbary carpet doing? Well, we think that populations seem to be stable over the past 3 years. It's quite difficult to tell due to just the presence-absence survey method. Sometimes you might get a negative result at one particular colony, but you'll get a positive result at a colony where you haven't had Barbary carpet for a while. But it seems pretty stable on these colonies. And I think, you know, in the Dorset colony area, the fact that we managed to trap 17 adults seemed to point to this colony being one of the stronger ones now. We had this great event in January this year. This was organised by my colleague Emma at back from the Brink team, and a community artist, Joe Callahan. It was a lantern parade for the Barberry carpet. So Joe visited a local school in one of the colony areas and made these fantastic lanterns with the kids, and this was supposed to represent the pupae of Barbary carpet, seeing as they would have been in pupal stage at the time. And we had a lovely procession through the streets of Malmesbury down to the river, where we'd done some planting with the Malmesbury River Trust volunteers, and we had a great wassail for the Barbary carpet and chanted for the moth, and this was a really charming event and something that was lovely to be involved in. So the final plans for the last 8 months of the project, well, I've already said I'm going to hopefully have another 900 plants to plant. More events, I really hope that will be allowed out soon, and that might be able to have events in August, late August time. Larval surveys should at least be able to go ahead, because it's perfectly easy to socially distance yourself while you're out searching for these Barbary carpet larvae. And I'm hoping to encourage plant nurseries in the target areas to grow and sell Barbary, as long as they're far enough from crops. You know, and as long as we put up signs about planting at least 20 metres away, or whatever is the latest advice from the crop scientists. And I need to plan a good legacy of the project to make sure that our sites are still getting some attention, and the Barbary in particular is getting some attention. And when we'll know if the project is a success? Well, we hope to start seeing new colonies of the moth in the next few years, but we don't expect the plants to be colonised until they're at least a metre tall. Some of the colonies are very small, so it might take a little time for them to spread, but we plan to start on checking some of the new plants this season for larvae. So we could have exciting news, you never know. Also, I just wanted to tell you, the John Innes Centre and Drayton Manor Zoo are funding a PhD entitled Conservation and Crop Protection Unit to Save the Barbary Carpet Moth. And they have a PhD student, Will, who is focusing on increasing the biological and ecological understanding of the species and identifying important resources and environmental conditions that are important at the current populations of the moth. So it'd be really interesting to see what comes out of that. He'll also be looking at other suitable Berberis species that Barbary carpet may be able to survive upon, although, you know, obviously the Berberis vulgaris is the preferred option. And there is talk of setting up a captive breeding population of the moth again at Drayton Manor, so it'll be interesting to see if that happens. And also, I just wanted to tell you that the John Innes Centre have got a citizen science-led way to track where the Barbary is in the UK. The plant is still very under-recorded, but if you enter records through this Barbary Rust Explorer, well, you look up Barbary Rust Explorer online, and you can download the iNaturalist app on your phone. You know, once records have been entered, they can visit the Barbary to test for rusts. As I already said, many rust species affect Barbary, but it'd be really good for them to get more records on where the plant is. And how can you help? Well, there are probably many ways you can contribute to the project. If you happen to live within our target areas, you could volunteer to have some Barbary plants this year. As long as you're at least 20 metres from arable land, this is brilliant. You could volunteer with your local butterfly conservation branch or back from the Brink Project, or get involved with moth conservation work. If you do moth surveying, do send in your records. It's really, really important. You could also potentially volunteer to check on Barbary planting sites in the future once the project is ended, or even be trained to become a licensed surveyor for the larvae. So do get in touch with me for details. Also, if you do have hedges, don't cut them all in one go, and not before October. So these are that's my email address down there. And I'd just like to say a massive thank you to all of the volunteers I've worked with, the licensed surveyors, the project partners, BC branches, landowners, and back from the Brink colleagues who have helped this project run smoothly. Also to Paul Waring and Ian Hughes for sharing with me all their information on past projects, all the photographers whose photos I've used in here. And also Paul Waring has written many articles on his introduction work. If you are interested, you can look them up. And so let's hope that the future for the Barbary carpet moth is much, much brighter. Any questions? And I shall stop sharing my screen.
Brilliant. Thank you very much for that, Fiona. We've got a few
Okay.
questions in the chat already, so if anyone else has questions, please do raise your hand or post it in the chat as well. I'm going to start reading through those ones now. So we heard a question earlier from Mia asking how close do the moth populations need to be able to breed with each other?
It's a really good question, that, and we don't know for sure, but we think that the colonies in Wiltshire we don't think are interbreeding at all, and some of them are sort of maybe 4 kilometres apart from each other, and or more. So that's why we're sort of going with this 2 kilometre distance of planting. We're not sure that that they can't disperse over a wider area, but we're trying to provide as many stepping stones as possible. We do have information from the population in South Wiltshire where the moths on their own spread to a new Barbary hedge, which was 2 kilometres away from their original site. So that's why I think we're going with this 2 kilometre rule, but it doesn't mean that they can't disperse over further. But the closer together the colonies are, you know, the food plant is, the better.
Yeah, that makes sense. We had a question from Danielle as well, asking, do the Barbary plants need to be a certain age before they're able to host the moth? And does it require a certain type of soil or just not to be waterlogged?
Yeah, we think they are tolerant of a range of soil types, Barbary plants. We think they do really well on chalky soil. Actually, some of the sites that I've been to, especially after a drought period, you'd think that on the really chalky sites the Barbary would have died because the soil just looked dire, like there couldn't be any moisture in it. But actually some of those plants have done particularly well. But the different colonies are on slightly different soil types. But I think generally chalky soil, limestone soil is quite a good thing. But they do well on other areas. We don't know in terms of the age of the plant. It's I think we're talking when we're not. The Barbary carpet haven't been found on plants that are smaller than a metre tall, so, and they are slow growing. So I think that we're talking about maybe a 5-year-old plant and above.
Bro, thank you.
Oh, that I've just seen that. Do they eat carpets? That is something that I've been asked many times, and actually I meant to mention this in the presentation. Sorry to butt in, but that made me laugh. So quite often when I'm talking to people about Barbary carpet moth, they don't want to plant the plant because they think that it's going to attract moths in to then eat their carpets, and they do not eat carpets. That is all they eat is Barbary. And I think that it's unfortunate that we've got these carpet moths, because all of the moths that are actually called carpet moths, they're not the ones that would eat your carpets, are they? So they're just been named by Victorian naturalists with very ornate carpets, so obviously they were reminiscent, the patterns. So yeah, that's what I keep on saying to people.
That was a good question. And we
Yeah.
had from Joe as well, asking, would there be any point in him planting a bush in his garden in London, and can you get them from the garden centre?
Well, no, you can't get them from the garden centre. So there is there is one site online that I've found where you can buy Barbary. So they sell little seedlings, and I think it's always worth planting Barbary. I'm a big fan of the plant. I think it's got a really interesting history, and there's a lot of people out there that actually want to grow Barbary for the berries because they're so popular in cookery as well. I've been actually contacted by quite a few people about that because they're quite popular in cookery in the Middle East and also in Eastern Europe. But so I think it's always worth planting Barbary. Really good for wildlife. There is, if I can remember the name of, I'll have to write it down, and I'll remember the name of the website where you can buy it. And then I'd always recommend it as long as you're far enough away from arable land. Oh, I think it's British Wildflowers. There's a website called British Wildflowers, and it's an online shop, and they sell a huge range of native plants. And if you search for Berberis in their search, you'll bring up Berberis vulgaris. So yes, do go for it.
Oh, thank you. We had a question from Alexandra as well, just asking, are there any plans to expand the project to Ireland?
Oh, that'd be amazing. I don't think we know of any records in Ireland in the past. So I think that unfortunately, these things are all dependent on funding, aren't they? And the funding does end in 2021 for this project. It would be fantastic to expand it further. And I would, and I definitely encourage I'd encourage anyone to get hold of the Berberis vulgaris as long as they're far enough from arable land. But no, unfortunately, no plans to extend into Ireland.
No worries. A question from Sarah here asking, how is the project being received by the public? Was it hard to encourage enthusiasm about the Barbary carpet?
I think that's a good question. It was received quite well. I think I've definitely come up against that issue of people thinking that Barbary carpets are going to eat their carpets, and so why would we want to encourage them? That's definitely been a stumbling block sometimes. And also the fact that the Berberis plants have got these prickles on them, they're quite sharp spines on them, and so that is often a concern for people who don't want to plant it if it's in a school, if a child could injure themselves. So it's it's the prickle isn't any worse, the thorns aren't any worse than hawthorn or blackthorn, but you know, and I think sometimes it's hard to enthuse people about a small brown moth, but I would argue that this Barberry carpet is an exquisite little creature. But yeah, a lot of people, I think if it looked more like a red admiral, maybe it might be easier to sell. So yes, there's been sometimes limited enthusiasm, but other times, you know, in every colony area there've been some really good there's been a good level of enthusiasm from some key individuals. And I think that focusing as well on the plant as well as the moth has been really good, and focusing on the wider wildlife benefits and talking a bit about bringing in hedgerow management as well has helped as well, I think.
That's great, thank you. We had a question from Giles asking, can Barbary be raised from cuttings?
It can actually, yes, it can, and some of the volunteers and the growers do cuttings. I haven't tried it myself, but I believe it's really easy to grow from cuttings. So yeah, that's a good thing. But obviously, if you take any cuttings, then don't do it during the period when you might be, if you happen to be in a colony area, don't do a cutting. You probably wouldn't anyway, but at the time of year that you'd have caterpillars on the plant.
Yeah. Another question from Joe. You hinted that this will be the subject of a PhD, but do you have any clues what other factors will help them off other than the Barbary plant? Would a clump of Barbary in a supermarket car park, for example, be any good, or do they need lots of pollinating flowers nearby?
Yeah, I think so. As I said earlier, that, you know, we know that the adult moths do nectar, and in fact, it was really lovely to see them nectaring on Barbary in Dorset last year. So that was a really nice thing, because we weren't sure that they would nectar on Barbary. I don't know why we thought they might not, but we also think it's not essential for the adult moths to nectar. So I think we're, you know, through all of the previous work through the growers and people doing lots of work on getting the introductions going, there's been a lot of, unfortunately, you know, places where the colonies haven't taken, and they've been introduced and then they've been found again a couple of years later, but then they haven't, then no larvae seen since. So it's led us to believe, because the sites were seemingly really suitable and had fantastic Barbary and lots of other good management going on, led us to believe that we didn't know everything that the moth needed. But I think that from some of the colonies, you know, are very, very small and just existing on a very small number of bushes, and there doesn't seem to me to be anything particular about those areas compared to the, you know, other areas that make it more suitable. So it'd be really interesting if the PhD student comes up with some particular environmental conditions that all of these colony areas where we've still got the moth have got in common, through his extensive testing. Unfortunately, I think through COVID-19, that work has been delayed slightly, but it'd be really interesting if we end up learning more about what the moth needs.
Yeah, definitely. We've got a question from Victoria. She's just completed a degree in wildlife conservation and was wondering if you have any advice or possibly know anyone she could get in contact with in regards to getting a career in species reintroductions. Yeah.
That's a good question. I think it's worth contacting all the organisations like Butterfly Conservation and places like Plant Life. You know, if there's a particular area, a particular group of species she'd like to work on as well, that would be, you know, I think there's a lot if she's particularly interested in butterflies and moths, I think it's really worth getting in touch with her local butterfly conservation branch, because the branches are really active throughout the UK and do loads of great work and have loads of great contacts. So you know, there could be things that she could start doing as a volunteer and then find her way in through that sort of thing. And I generally find that getting involved with lots of volunteer work is the best way in, if you can afford to do it, you know. So I did lots of volunteering with butterfly conservation and with the Ark Trust, you know, and I know that the Ark Trust have done lots of like lizard, you know, sand lizard reintroductions and stuff like that. So I haven't, unfortunately, but I could have got involved more with that. So I'd advise her to sort of get in touch with this different conservation bodies and see what opportunities there are out there.
Yeah, brilliant, thank you. A question from Stephen. That was really interesting about the debate as to whether Barbary is native. He noticed that Rose lists Barbary as an introduced species from Europe. Do you have any thoughts on how long the moth has been here?
We've known about, it's been recorded in Britain since the 1800s at least, the moth. So, and it's interesting about whether or not it's native and how far back you have to go to consider whether something is a native plant and a welcome addition or not, you know. And I think for me, if it's been here since Neolithic times, that's good enough. But it's really interesting thinking about it, and different organisations list it differently. I should have written it down, but one of the I think it might be BSBI lists it as a native plant. So, you know, you'll find different expert sources listing it differently. You know, Rose might say one thing, but another website will say something different. So it's very interesting. Yeah, it's a fascinating history of the plant, I think.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, almost time to finish. I'm just going to check I've got through all of the questions. You were talking about the berries being used earlier. Do you know if they're sweet or sour?
I do. I think so. I really like them. They are. Most people say they're quite tart, but I think that they're really nice. I've been putting them in flapjacks for my volunteers. They're really good. I managed to find some in a local health food shop. So, you know, they are really good, and I've put them in chutneys, and I think they're really nice. So yeah, they're apparently used very much in rice dishes and so on, and salads and things, as well as in these. But they were particularly in medieval times, they were particularly well used by you know, apparently, you know, you got a lot of these Barbary plants next to priories and nunneries and so on. So they were frequent. You know, frequently used in pies.
Nice.
Yeah, very nice. I like them.
We have got one last question I'll squeeze in. It was a question from Jack asking, did mainland Europe see the decline in the Barberry carpet populations as seen in England? And is there any conservation work going on there?
It's a really good question, and one that I preempted, but I didn't manage to find any information on. I'm really sorry. So I could try and find out that information and get back to you if you're interested, because I'm really interested in that. All I've found is that it's often only locally, you know, occurs only locally. They've had these problems with the wheat rusts across Europe and in Canada and Ethiopia. This particular stem rust caused really bad problems, but I don't know if they've don't know if Barbary was implicated there. Don't think it was. I don't think that's in its natural range. So yeah, and that actually, that me mentioning Canada reminds me that there's been, you know, particularly I was dealing with one particular landowner who was Canadian, and so didn't want to plant Barbary because she remembered all of the problems that they'd had with Barbary in Canada. So, you know, that it had been practically a notifiable weed out there. You know, you really didn't, even just a couple of years ago, you just wouldn't plant it near these areas. So yes, there's obviously been a lot of concern about planting it, and also this issue over whether it's a native plant or not has impacted whether people are happy to plant it out in the countryside, understandably, because we've got so many problems with non-native plant species taking over areas that you know, you could think that if you plant a non-native plant that it's going to really take over. You know, personally, in my job in conservation, you know, I've had battled endless amounts of laurel and rhododendron and bamboo and things, but Barbary seems really slow to grow. So there's never a problem with it spreading. It's more of a problem of keeping it growing compared to the things around it like clematis and bramble that take over.
Oh, brilliant. Thank you very much. Right,
Okay.
we're at the end of the meetup now. So thank you everyone for coming along today, and a big thank you to Fiona as well for joining us and giving us this talk today. It's been a really interesting one. I didn't realise there were so many issues with Barbary as well.
Holly, can I just clarify something?
Yeah.
There were a couple of comments about tomorrow's VMU. Is it closed now?
I haven't closed it. I've been on this, so
Apparently it says it's full online then, so maybe it's filled up while we're on air.
I think probably so, yeah, if it says that. So yeah, sorry everyone. I'll have a double check now and make sure we've got no cancellations. There might be a couple of places. But yeah, thank you all for coming today. And
Thank you very much, everyone. Oh, sorry, the dog's barking now.
Thank you, Fiona.
Thank you very much.
Thank you all.
Bye.
Hopefully we'll see you all soon.
Thank you.
Thank you.